Good morning, everyone. I hope you are doing well this week. I don't know about you, but here in Nebraska, it is freaking cold. We had record low temperatures this week. I feel like it was negative 15 or 17 or something. It's snowing again. We haven't gotten rid of the previous snow. It is a crazy time. So I hope you guys are staying warm wherever you are at. All right, it's time to do our continuing reading of Dr. Atkins Diet Revolution by Robert Atkins, the doctor. And just keep in mind, little disclaimer here, I'm not a medical professional, so please seek advice from your doctor before doing anything that I recommend. Also, before we get started, I will give you a little update. I saw my doctor yesterday. I'm on a medication, so I just had to go and check that up again. And she asked me how I was doing on Atkins, and I told her, and she said, very good. And she said that maybe don't have to recheck my blood right now, but think about it in probably next year and see where the changes have gone. So, at any rate, today's chapter 5, is called "If You're Always Fighting Fat, Chances Are You're Allergic to Carbohydrates." Allergic in quotes. So, let's go on with this. Definition of the most common of all allergies. How do I define this phrase I find convenient? An allergy to carbohydrates. It is not a true allergy, as we doctors know it, but it is a sensitivity to carbohydrates in the diet, which results in an overproduction of insulin. Hyperinsulinism. In other words, and remember this because it is the basic reason for your overweight, if you are allergic to carbohydrates, carbohydrates taken into your body release a flow of surplus insulin into your bloodstream. This doesn't mean that you are seriously ill. It simply means that your body overreacts to carbohydrates, just as another person's may overreact to seafood. You don't break out in a rash, you break out in rolls of fat. Also, perhaps in fatigue, depression, a craving for sweets, and a raised level of triglycerides. I like to kind of compare this to alcoholism. So, if you're kind of having trouble with this one, think about an alcoholic, how they cannot stay away from alcohol once they start drinking. That's our addiction to sweets and other carbs. And that once they quit drinking, they have to be clean forever, or else they'll go right back into that. So I tell myself to compare it to alcoholism, and I hope that helps. Allergy here means a disturbed carbohydrate metabolism. Most overweight people have a disturbed metabolism. Metabolism is the process by which food is changed into the chemicals your body can use for energy or to form body tissues. Metabolism has many subdivisions. There is a basal metabolic rate, the part that is governed by the thyroid gland. But we also speak, for example, of salt and water metabolism, protein metabolism, fat metabolism, all describing the processes by which your body handles these substances. The category of metabolism that seems to be most sensitive in the overweight person is the carbohydrate metabolism. If you are always fighting fat, the primary cause is likely to be a disturbed carbohydrate metabolism. A conservative doctor I know disagrees with me about this. He maintains it's the overweight that causes the disturbed metabolism. You're putting the cart before the horse, he tells me. Well, I say, when patients come to see me, both the cart and the horse have arrived in the office at the same time. What difference does it make to them which comes first? Whichever came first, because it is carbohydrates that trigger the trouble, there is just one maximally effect treatment for such people. Cut carbohydrate intake right down to the bone, just like an alcoholic. I get angry over the needlessness of overweight. For millions who suffer the endless physical and emotional miseries of being fat, it is a tragedy that so few authorities understand the overweight for what it is, a disordered carbohydrate metabolism, which affects some people and not others. That is quite apart from the amount of food or calories consumed. I get angry when I think of the useless, needless deprivations imposed on fat people by most diets. Deprivation isn't all that overweight people with a disturbed carbohydrate metabolism have to bear. They usually suffer also from periods of extremely low energy, the most common symptom of low blood sugar. Unhappily, the usual handy dandy remedy for that utterly all gone feeling is a quick fix of the same poison to which overweight people are usually both allergic and addicted: sugar. In some of the time, it's alcohol. It's easy to make that comparison. So, like, I know for me, I just crave sugar sometimes. And sometimes there's nothing else I can do but to go get an Atkins bar, which I'm trying to stay away from them. Not have them all the time, but sometimes that's the only thing. Otherwise, I just keep feeling hungry. And it's just like the alcoholic. There's nothing else that fills that craving. How this vicious cycle works. Do you see yourself here? Let's suppose that you've learned from experience that you tend to run down around 5 p.m. to the point where you know you need a lift. And you've learned that a candy bar gives you a quick pickup in energy. Perfectly normal, isn't it? Wrong. The normal person is expected to have the proper biologic machinery to keep his blood sugar in the symptom-free range. The fact that the sugar in the candy bar changes the way you feel shows that your blood sugar falls too low. But what happens after the candy bar? Why doesn't the lift in energy last very long? Here's what happens. The candy sent the blood sugar level up only briefly, just long enough to signal the oversensitized pancreas to release an oversupply of insulin. And that's why I try not to have my Atkins bars either, because although it's not pure sugar, they do have some ingredients that Dr. Atkins will tell you later in his books that he doesn't agree with. And I don't like the way that they added those ingredients into the products with his name on it. But at any rate, it's better than a real candy bar than going to get your Kit Kat, Hershey's. Well, Hershey's isn't actually that bad, I don't think. But anyway, we won't go there. But anyway, the pure sugar candy bars, Atkins bar is not as bad. So that's why I go for that. But I still feel that same rush of energy like I do from sugar. And then it just, I don't know, it's weird. So it's okay once in a while, but not all the time, in my opinion. Understanding insulin is the key to understanding your overweight. Because insulin plays such a vital role in your metabolism, let's talk about it for a moment. Insulin is the hormone manufactured in little clusters or cells within the pancreas, called islets of Langerhans. Its principal function is to act upon the carbohydrate in the bloodstream, which is the form of glucose, and chemically deliver it to the body's tissues to be used as energy or to be converted into fat for storage of energy. If there is a surplus of glucose, it is converted into stored energy or fat. In delivering the correct amount of glucose to the tissues to be used as energy, it is useful. In delivering the surplus, it is bad for the person with a weight problem. It is important to know that insulin differs from hormones in the quantity circulating in the bloodstream changes on a minute-to-minute basis. Half of the insulin is removed from the blood within 7 minutes of its release. Thus, the level of sugar in the blood can change from minute to minute. When people tell you they have high blood sugar or low blood sugar, the answer should be when. Many people vary away from one extreme to the other within a few hours. When you eat your 5 p.m. pickup candy bar, the insulin it calls for causes the blood sugar to plummet down, lower than it was before you ate it. Usually, it takes only an hour for your energy to nosedive this way. And in some people, the effect is even faster and more dramatic. When your blood sugar is too low, your energy drops. The candy bar buys you a tiny interval of energy, but the price is too high. It leaves you in worse shape than before you ate it. Now you're so exhausted that you think, I need 2 candy bars and perhaps a drink. Well, that's not how you lose weight, is it? But there's an even more serious penalty. It's this. Each candy bar and the insulin flood it triggers aggravates aggregates your permanent sensitivity to carbohydrates. In other words, the more sugar you eat in your lifetime, the more abnormal your response to sugar becomes. That has been demonstrated in many ways by a variety of medical studies. So when you eat your sugar on a regular basis, it's just going to make it worse as time goes on. And it's just like an alcoholic. If he or she doesn't stop drinking, then as time goes on, they're going to need more and more and more. It was actually explained to me by, I saw it on YouTube once, and they were talking about alcoholism and how there's this line here. This is normal. Then they drink, they go up here. Then they sober up, they come down here. So then they have to drink, and this line keeps getting lower and lower, and they have to drink more and more and more in order to get back up here. So think of sugar the same way. This is where normal is, and every time you have a candy bar, you go up, but then you get down here. That's the crash at the end. And then you have to eat something else in order to get back up to the normal level. So it's just, as time goes on, it's going to take more and more and more to get there. Besides lowering your blood sugar, insulin increases your triglycerides. Sorry about that. For years, some of the most eminent medical researchers, among them Dr. John Yudkin, Dr. Peter T. Quao, and Dr. D.R. Bassett, both of Philadelphia, and Professor Margaret J. Albrink of the West Virginia School of Medicine, have been warning us that sugar in the diet leads to heart disease. But the entrenched medical establishment has ignored the body of evidence offered. There is, however, increasing recognition that there is a strong correlation between high levels of insulin and high levels of triglycerides in the blood. The fat that we store in our fat cells is stored in the form of triglycerides. It has also been observed that there is a strong correlation between high triglycerides and coronary heart disease. Not long ago, the big villain here was thought to be cholesterol. And that was still true. But it now appears that the correlation with heart attacks may be even higher with elevated triglycerides than with high cholesterol levels. Insulin is a mediator of the manufacture of triglycerides, so that the greater the insulin levels, the greater the triglyceride levels. And that's why this works, because people think that if they eat a lot of meat like steak and eggs and different things, that's going to be giving them heart problems because of cholesterol. Well, there's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. And some of the stuff we've typically thought of as bad is actually not all that bad. So when we're eating this way, we're not getting those sugar spikes. That's what's saving our hearts. Insulin has been called the fatting hormone. And most important, we come to the role that insulin plays in the metabolism of fat. Insulin has been called the fattening hormone. It promotes the conversion of sugar, glucose, into fat by initiating the manufacture of fatty acids. And it somehow prevents fat from breaking down so that it cannot be used up as the reserve source of fuel it was meant to be. The theory is that insulin indirectly reduces the activity of a group of substances called lipid mobilizers. They control the movements of fat out of the unsightly spare time places it is kept. One of these fat mobilizers was mentioned earlier, the FMH, fat mobilizing hormone, of the pituitary gland. What all this means to you, fat fighters, is that the more insulin you produce, that is, the more disturbed is your metabolism, the greater resistance you have in breaking down your fat. I think I have a higher resistance. So if it's more difficult for you to lose weight than it is for some people, you probably can blame it on a tendency to readily overproduce insulin. But don't give up. It may be more difficult for you to lose, perhaps, but it is never impossible with a diet low enough in carbohydrate. Almost half of my successful losers have shown this metabolic resistance to losing weight, but they all lost nevertheless. What are the immediate complications of carbohydrate poisoning? You probably wouldn't be reading this book if weight gain weren't the immediate complication of carbohydrate poisoning that most disturbs you. You may not like the idea that in order to lose your fat, you are going to have to cut down sharply on your consumption of carbohydrates, your favorite food perhaps. It may be a new idea to you, and even the loathsome alternative of starving may seem preferable to you at first. But that's only because you haven't been exposed to the advantages that a low carbohydrate diet presents. But I'll promise you this, from my experience with thousands of patients, I can assure you that cutting carbohydrates is infinitely less painful than cutting calories. That's what my patients tell me. That's what I found out for myself and live by. This is partly because you're never hungry, partly because your food percentages change, and partly because once you understand what carbohydrates do to you, they become, in your own mind, your enemy. You not only don't want them, you feel downright hostility toward them. Nothing could ever make me eat that junk again. I hear that over and over from ex-carbohydrate eaters. I gotta get a drink real quick. Iced coffee. Um, yeah, I'll tell you, my two favorite things are pizza and Mexican from our favorite restaurant, which is like 6 blocks away from us. Um, and lately, my daughter has been wanting, we do girls' night on Tuesday nights, and lately she's been wanting pizza, and I gave in 2 weeks in a row. I shouldn't have done that. But last night, I thought ahead, and I had gotten some of those pre made pizza crusts so you can make your own. Excuse me. And so I had her make that for herself. And then I had a recipe for a low carb, excuse me, for a low carb pizza crust. So I made that. It didn't take long. It had some almond flour, a little bit of coconut flour, um, egg, basic ingredients, some spices. I think next time I'm going to add some extra spices like Italian seasoning or something. It did kind of have a weird taste, but I know there's a ton of different recipes out there for low carb pizza crust. So it's trial and error. And I did a lot. I feel a lot better today, just in general. And I feel better about myself because I chose to make a better choice. It probably had more carbs than I should have had. I didn't count them. Uh, but it was a heck of a lot better than eating Pizza Hut pizza. So when you're in a dilemma like that, just try to make the better choice if there's an option that would be just a little bit better. Plus, we had fun. She really liked making her own pizza. She's 12, almost 13, so she likes doing that stuff. Let's see, where was I? Even nonstop eaters can lose when they skip carbohydrates. Selma Zisk is one of these ex-carbohydrate eaters. She has lost 60 pounds. She's 38, 5'4" tall, a cheerful brunette who weighed 118 when she was married, but gained after each of her 4 children. Gained after each of her 4 children was born, so that she weighed 209 when she came to see me. She had lost weight exactly 20 times with diet pills. After each diet, she gained back more than she had lost. As my patient, she lost 36 pounds in the first 12 weeks. When she continued to lose more slowly but steadily, week after week, until she got down to a respectable weight again. She has often reminded me of what I told her on her first visit. You'll never live to see your children grow up at the rate you're gaining. She now says, I never had willpower, but I stuck to the diet for 3 reasons. Because it's so easy to live with, because you scared the hell out of me on that first visit, and because of the compliments I've received as I have lost. My family is thrilled. It's a fantastic way of life for me. Selma had never been able to stay with the usual diets. Selma, like so many overweight people, has low blood sugar of diabetic origin. Besides diet pills, she has tried shots, the meat and water diet, as well as diet group therapy. Her weaknesses are cola beverages, cake, and cookies. I'm the kind that likes to eat all day long, she says. What I ate between meals on the other diets, carrot sticks, celery, pickles, never satisfied me emotionally. I love being able to have a big dish of diet jello with whipped cream and almonds instead, or a chicken salad with lots of mayonnaise. She has good ideas for varying her diet. Shish kebab, well marinated beforehand in Italian dressing and white wine, salmon croquettes, excuse me, made with eggs and no breadcrumbs, veal birds. A favorite canapé is water chestnuts wrapped in bacon. The whole thing is marvel, she says. I just took each day as it came. You did great today, kid, I told myself. Just take tomorrow when it gets here. What Selma has learned is that all of her many todays have made tomorrow a habit. Selma, with her blood sugar disorder, is a good example of metabolic overweight. And see, that's what I try to do. I try to take one day at a time. I try to just focus on what I'm doing right now and not worry about tomorrow or even the next meal today. I just try to know what I need to do at that time. With an abnormal metabolism, fat may be manufactured even without food. Harvard Dr. Jean Mayer notes in this connection that an animal with metabolic overweight will make more fat even though it may not overeat. In fact, it will make more fat even while fasting. Think about this a little. It certainly brings home the point that with a disturbed metabolism, just eating less food isn't the answer, doesn't it? This isn't bad news, it's good news. Once you understand why this happens, then for the first time you can hope to win for good against overweight. What all this means to you. Overweight is not only an illness in itself, but is a symptom of illness ranging in seriousness from minor to fatal. Sometimes I shock patients when I tell them, you'll be dead in 2 years if you continue eating and gaining the way you do. According to Metropolitan Life Insurance studies, the death rate for overweight men is 75% higher than those of normal weight. The death rate of overweight women is 61% higher. You may think that you'd like to lose some weight just so that you will like what you see in the mirror better, but what's at stake is much more. A tree with deadly branches. There is a tree. For a minute, we won't give the tree a name. Its branches are called diabetes, heart disease, overweight, low blood sugar, peptic ulcer, migraine, allergy, and half a dozen other diseases that are so common nowadays. And they still are. The name of the tree might be a disturbed way of handling carbohydrates. Sorry, I got another drink. And yes, I have sugar-free sweetener in my iced coffee, just so you're wondering. Let's see. If carbohydrates are your particular poison, we know that some of us are susceptible to complications of carbohydrate consumption, especially from sugar, and some of us are remarkably free from them. But suppose that you are one of the carbohydrate, carbohydrate sensitive people, and the carbohydrates you take in stimulate an overproduction of insulin. We know from experiments done with animals by Dr. R.W. Stout of Belfast that adding insulin will speed up the formation of atherosclerotic deposits in key blood vessels. And we know that this can be the forerunner of many serious ailments. Hyperinsulinism and heart disease. Of course, hyperinsulinism isn't the only contributing factor in cardiovascular complications. They are also aggravated by stress, smoking, too little exercise, and perhaps in some people are the physiological result in a special sensitivity to fats in the diet. However, Dr. Yudkin has pointed out that increased sugar consumption may be the most significant factor. He maintains that even when fats have been blamed As the chief culprit in coronary problems, the diet eaten by the subjects studied also proved very high in sugar. The more sugar in the diet, the more heart disease. He cites the Maasai and Samburu tribes in East Africa, where the diet is high in fat but low in sugar. There, the rate of coronary disease is extremely low. Among the residents of the island of St. Helena, on the other hand, where the diet is high in sugar and low in fat, the rate of coronary heart disease is high. Cutting carbohydrates prevents what can't be cured. By cutting carbohydrates in your diet, we are not just treating you for that unbecoming fat you want to lose, but are probably prolonging your life. Are all overweight people a little bit diabetic? This is not primarily a book for diabetics, but it is a book for people who have some weight to lose because their bodies produce an oversupply of insulin. I am not alone in the view that such people are perhaps a little bit diabetic, pre-diabetic at least. So it's important to understand a few things about this condition. The amount of sugar, glucose, needed to keep the nervous system and brain functioning well is approximately 2 teaspoons circulating constantly in the blood. This is the amount of blood a normal person contains. When the blood persistently contains more sugar than normal, the condition is prescribed as diabetic. The direct connection between diabetes and the amount of sugar you eat was demonstrated in England during the World War II. When sugar was rationed there then, deaths from diabetes dropped more than 40%. And when sugar was added to the diet of the nomadic Jewish people of Yemen after they moved to the Israeli cities following World War II, the incidence of diabetes there increased dramatically. And with it, heart disease, almost unheard of before, became just as prevalent as in the rest of urbanized Israel. Causes of diabetes. The whole story of what causes diabetes is not known. There are 2 quite different types. The kind that children have is so different that it may not even be the same disease. It is a far more severe illness, and it requires insulin therapy because insulin is deficient. The kind that begins in overweight adults can be much less dramatic and almost always can be prevented from progressing to a point where insulin is required. My mom had diabetes. She was overweight, I think probably her whole life. I saw pictures of her as like a teenager, and she wasn't like super fat, but she wasn't thin either. So, the years I knew her, she was always overweight. And then she got diagnosed with diabetes finally. She said she knew she had it for a long time, but just didn't do anything about it. Lovely mother. Oh boy. So I know that I'm at high risk for it, and being overweight does not help. So that's why, one of the reasons why I would like to lose more weight, and that's why I'm working on this. Heredity plays an important role. There you go. We do know that in both types, your heredity is important. If someone in your family had diabetes, you must be on guard all your life against it. If one parent had it, you have a 50% chance of having it. If both parents had it, you are, by definition, a pre-diabetic, meaning that theoretically, there is a 100% probability that you will have it eventually. Age is another critical factor. As people get older, the rate at which their system removes sugar from the blood falls to such an extent that it is estimated that nearly half of those 60 years old would be classified as chemically diabetic if the testing standards used on younger people were applied to them. The third factor is prolonged overeating or refined carbohydrates. This often brings about hyperinsulinism and a breakdown in your body's ability to metabolize carbohydrates. If the adult onset diabetic's diet had been carbohydrate free from babyhood on, would that diabetic gene ever have manifested itself? We can only speculate, but we know that diabetes does not exist in cultures where refined carbohydrates are not consumed. It's interesting. But isn't diabetes licked since insulin was discovered in 1921? Far from being one of our conquered diseases, diabetes still affects 6 to 10% of America's population. There are said to be more than 1 million undiagnosed and untreated diabetics in this country. But my own laboratory incidence statistics indicate that there may be millions more than that. And I am absolutely positive, in my opinion, of course, that number has probably doubled by now. There's so much diabetes in this country. It's just nuts. And I'm sure the rest of the world as well. When the disturbance is neglected. Yet diabetes is one of life's easiest illnesses to control. One need only to have it diagnosed when it is the early chemical or latent stages and stop eating the carbohydrates with which it cannot progress. Don't wait for symptoms. The classic ones are increased thirst, increased urinary output, and unexplained loss of weight. Because by then, it is rather late. The symptoms of early diabetes are probably overweight itself and the signs of low blood sugar described elsewhere in this book. Low blood sugar might, in fact, be the first recognizable stage of diabetes. Do-it-yourself diabetes screening test. To screen a patient for diabetes, too many doctors merely take a single blood sugar test in the morning before the patient has eaten, or rely on a casual urine specimen during a routine checkup. But my studies show that 90% of all cases are missed that way. I recommend a standard glucose tolerance test interpreted by the criteria of the American Diabetes Association. Of the 2,000 patients I have found who exceeded these limits and were therefore early diabetics, 1,900 had no inkling of this fact, yet almost all had been given regular checkups by their own physicians. Because 1 out of 5 of my office patients show sugar in their urine after a standard dose of glucose, I assume that the same percentage may well apply to my readers. Before you start this or any diet, you should do the following screening procedure as a minimum effort. Now, this is important. And this is what I got done last year after I read this. How to give yourself a glucose tolerance test, GTT. The first thing you need is a dose of glucose. Oh, sorry, I thought there was something else. To prepare this, purchase a bottle of Glucola or Paladex at any drugstore. 2 bottles if you weigh over 225 pounds, or an equivalent 1/2 cup of cola syrup diluted as much water or soda as you please, also does nicely. At the same time, buy a few urine glucose testing strips. Test tape will turn green. Clinistics will turn blue if sugar is present. No prescription is needed for any of these. I might try to do this. Eat your usual diet, making sure that for 3 days you have had at least 600 calories a day in the form of carbohydrates. At the end of the 3rd day, do not eat after retiring. First thing in the morning of the 4th day, quickly drink the glucose. Void your urine as often as you can and test every specimen for glucose. If it turns positive, You are a prime diabetic suspect and must arrange for a glucose tolerance test by a laboratory or a doctor. To learn more about yourself, continue to go without eating for 6 hours and pay attention to how you feel. If you get dizzy, clammy, tired, irritable, headachy, lightheaded, emotional, tearful, or any other symptoms you have suffered from, then you are probably experiencing low blood sugar. This home screening test tells you that you must get the full glucose tolerance test to confirm this diagnosis. If you experience these symptoms, it is essential that you see your doctor and insist upon being given a careful test by him. Do not accept a yes or a no about the diagnosis, but ask for the numbers of your glucose tolerance test. Is there a difference of 100 or more points between the high and low reading? Does the sugar level drop more than 50 points in 1 hour? Does the low reading drop 30% or more below the starting point? In my experience, these are just some of the findings that correlate with the clinical symptoms of low blood sugar. Your overweight, low blood sugar, and diabetes all have common denominator. But isn't a low blood sugar the opposite of diabetes? Patients ask me. No, I always answer. The opposite of diabetes is normal. Roughly, here's the way that overweight, low blood sugar, and diabetes relate. Stage 1 begins with a genetic defect in your carbohydrate metabolism. You literally have a carbohydrate allergy, demonstrated by your being overweight, but your glucose tolerance is still normal. In stage 2, the pancreas continues to overwork and overproduce insulin. The result, more overweight and low blood sugar, can be demonstrated. In stage 3, the pancreas continues to overwork, but the insulin can no longer immediately control the blood sugar balance. The result, overweight symptoms of a low blood sugar and a glucose tolerance test that shows both diabetes and a low level of blood sugar. This stage is found as frequently as any other among my patients. In stage 4, the pancreas, although still releasing large amounts of insulin, cannot produce enough of the hormone to handle the increasing demands of its supply. The result, overweight and a chronically high level of blood sugar that is overt diabetes. This is an oversimplification, and the phases may all occur at once, so that not all stages are found in every diabetic's past history. But the common denominator here is the trio overweight, low blood sugar, and diabetes. Excessive insulin is a common enemy. I ask you to make this connection clear, for you understand that overweight is a sickness, and see how it threatens your mobility, personality, youthfulness, and even your life. You'll decide that cutting down on carbohydrates for the rest of your life is something you want to do. And to eat the way you want to really requires no willpower. Control of diabetes is often just this diet. I have treated 2,000 stable adult diabetics. I have never yet had to begin giving injections of insulin. The diet described in this book has been effective in bringing both the diabetes and the overweight under control in every one of those 2,000 cases. I suppose it can happen that one day someone will walk in and be an exception, but so far it hasn't occurred. And that's the end of that chapter. And that's another thing. Probably about 2 years ago, I was really having problems eating. I I thought it was gluten for a while. I took that out and it kind of got better. But of course, I was also reducing a lot of carbs that way. But then I would have gluten-free bread, and then I started even having problems with that. And basically what would happen is I would just feel real tight in here in my chest. I was having trouble breathing, and then I would vomit what I was eating. And I was telling my doctor yesterday, I said, that hasn't happened to me in a really long time. Since I started on Atkins, it's gone away. And she said it could still be gluten because there's different ways to test it. There's the blood and different things, but she said that she's glad that I'm not having issues with that anymore, of course, because they tried everything. So I will tell you that doing Atkins, it makes me feel so much better. There's no way around it. And that's why I keep doing it. Even if I wasn't losing very much at all, even sticking to it 100%, then I would still do it just for that one symptom being gone. And that's why I'm really trying to get away from even the fake candy bars, because I feel like it's still a crutch. But eventually I will. I'm trying to have them less and less often. So at any rate, that's the reading for today. Sorry it took so long. I guess I ad-libbed a little bit too much. I hope you are enjoying this learning experience, and I hope that this helped you out. If you have diabetes in your family like I do, that chapter was really interesting to me. But at any rate, I will see you next